This area has a long history of flooding. Since 1913, the Susquehanna River has left its banks 100 times. In 1935, a terrible flood destroyed hundreds of homes in this area and across New York. It did nearly $5 billion in damages in today's dollars. Tragically, that flood left 43 people dead. In response, the federal government built a massive flood control dam in Whitney Point and constructed 18 miles of flood walls and levees in the area. Broome County built numerous smaller flood control structures, many of which are also recreational areas. This network of hard infrastructure largely worked for many decades. In 1972, Hurricane Agnes devastated communities throughout the southern tier of New York and the Susquehanna Valley in Pennsylvania. At the time, this was the worst natural disaster in U.S. history and was the highest recorded flood in Broome County. But the flood walls and levees protected downtown Binghamton from major damage in 1972. Hurricane Agnes was the record flood for over 30 years. Then, in June of 2006, a major storm dumped 7 inches of rain on the area, causing widespread flooding which overtopped flood walls and levees in some places. 3,000 residents had to be evacuated, and 300 were airlifted from homes in nearby Conklin. The Binghamton University Event Center was converted to an emergency shelter. Luckily, downtown was largely spared by this new record flood in 2006. This flood record only stood for 5 years. In 2011, Tropical Storm Lee brought 12 inches of rain to the area. This time the flood walls were not high enough to protect downtown. Across the area, hundreds of homes were damaged or destroyed. The University Downtown Center was swamped during this event. The UDC was opened in 2007. At the time, the flood maps, which dated from the 1980s, showed that the flood walls were high enough to protect the facility. But consistent with global warming predictions, we've been experiencing heavier rainfalls, and our flood walls and levees are no longer protective of the urban area. This is the top of the flood wall behind the UDC. To give you a sense of how high the floodwaters were in 2011, this is the distance between the river on a typical day and the top of the flood wall. That's 18 feet. When the university repaired the flood damage at the UDC, they moved the heating and cooling equipment to a higher location. If the flood walls are overtopped again, this will make the UDC easier to reoccupy. Hard infrastructure like flood walls and levees designed for the floods of 100 years ago are no longer enough for current climate conditions, but we have new tools for mitigating flood risk.